All right, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Untherapeutic. Today we have Dr. Candice Hargons. She is doing some phenomenal work around sex, and I'm going to let her share a little bit more about her research, about who she is. But today we're talking about this topic, and that is your job destroying your sex life? All right, is your job uh, destroying your sex life? And so I'm interested to dive in. But before we do that, Dr. Candice, tell us a little bit about yourself and a lot of the great work that you're doing from a research perspective.
Sure. So thank you so much for having me, Dr. Nick. I am excited to be here to talk about some of the science from the big sex study. So I'm an associate professor and interim department chair at the University of Kentucky. I'm the director of the Center for Healing Racial Trauma, and I'm also a hot girl scientist. And I
Mm,
say that to say that I have fun doing my research at Sex Positive. I study the good things about sex, so pleasure, orgasm, desire, things like that. And in our big sex study, we surveyed about 500 Black people.
mm.
And then we did interviews with some of them, and we did focus groups with some of them. And we asked those questions about pleasure, about orgasm, about how these different aspects of life as a Black person, all the ways we can be Black,
Mhm.
influence what your sex life looks like, how you function sexually.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, listen, I'm gonna be honest with you. Before we get into the actual topic itself, I just got some questions that I'm
Okay.
just curious to know. There's some topics that just come up a lot in many of the sessions, from men and women. And so I'm gonna just shoot them straight to you, and then
Okay. Go
give,
for
give
it.
me give me what you're seeing from a research perspective, from a practice perspective, and just living in this space for over a decade. So,
Okay.
first one is among men. Number one chief complaint I hear is, I wish my wife would initiate sex more.
Mm, mm. I feel for them in this so much because one thing I notice, and I've heard this similarly with men that I work with, and not just as research participants, but as clients as well, is that they want to feel desired. They
Hmm.
want to feel desired because men typically, and this is, like this is not everybody, but it's most people are the ones that initiate the relationship, that get to say, yes, we're official or we're not official, that have to take the first step when introducing themselves to a partner. And so they are subject to rejection way more than most women. And I'm talking about this in a heteronormative way, are
Mhm.
subject to rejection. And so when it comes to sex, especially with someone that they're already decided they want to be in a committed relationship with, they're together, they want some of that initiation so that the rejection doesn't have to always be something they're contending with or navigating, but also because it feels good to be desired. It's an affirmation for someone to say, I like the way you look, the way you smell, I want
Yeah.
you, I'm interested in you, I'm attracted to you. And most humans have that desire, but men, they experience it totally differently if they're always the one initiating. And
Mm.
so one of the conditions that typically impacts who initiates in the relationship, and this is a tough one, for this is a tough pill for a lot of men to swallow, is how women are slut shamed or sexually shamed. And so if they don't have permission
Mm.
throughout their whole life to be sexual initiators, to be sexual beings, then it's not like a switch goes off when you get married or you get partnered and all of a
Yeah.
sudden you're like, now it's safe, I can just do me, because there's always that fear that they might be judged. So for many of the men that I work with, I ask them to invite their partner to be their fullest sexual self. And how can I support you in being your fullest sexual self together? And ask them to say, okay, what do you like? What do I like? Where do we find our middle ground? And specifically, I want you to initiate more because it does this for me.
That's good. That's good. I was just going to ask you. All right. So, how do you get someone to kind of not be ashamed
Hmm.
to let out their inner freak?
Yay.
You know what I'm saying?
I
Right.
think you affirm it. Like if you see a little glimpse here and
Way to
there,
go,
so they had
baby.
one or two margaritas
Yeah. Oh
and you
yeah.
see a little
I'm
glimpse,
telling you,
affirm that, like, oh, I
put
like
it
that
on
side
top
of you.
shelf. Don't give
Yes,
me the watered
it's
down
gotta
house
be top
margarita.
shelf. It has to be. Like we're just too grown to play with other types of
Too grown,
spirits.
too grown. This doctor, now we're not doing no more watered
Thank
down.
you. Thank you. But
All
yeah,
right,
if you see a little glimpse, say, oh, I like that side of you. I love when you act like that. And then that's a cue to them, like, oh, so I'm not out here bad. I
yeah.
can practice this a little more. I can try this a little more.
I love it. So here's the second thing that comes up, okay? And I'm just kind of ping ponging back from a
Mhm.
man and from women that I hear a lot from, and that is, I can't lay with my husband, boyfriend, whatever, without him always trying to be sexual.
Mhm, mhm.
Like just hold me, just like it don't always have to turn into that.
Yeah.
And the rebuttal is, well, what you expect me to do? Okay, and that's and
A
I'm
and they said, "Just hold me." So the so the
yeah,
question
I just gave
so
you the
the question
answer.
right, so the question is not, "What do you expect me to do?" Because that's been communicated, but it sounds to me like the question might be, "How should I navigate my own arousal and desire?"
Okay.
And there's nothing wrong with being aroused if you're near your partner or you're touching your partner, but do you have a scarcity mindset around sex? Do you feel like if I don't jump on this opportunity now, I'm never going to get it again? And I hear that from a lot of guys. So one of my research studies was with Black men. I was doing focus groups with Black men, and a man mentioned that he felt like he was a late bloomer. So he had his sexual debut, his first sexual experience at 19. And for him, among his peers, that meant he was a late bloomer. He was like, so every time I have an opportunity to have sex with someone, I feel like I got to go for it. I can't even say no
Mm,
because I don't know when it will happen again. And I carry that fear with me. And so maybe the men in the relationship who don't know how to turn off, like I'm aroused, but I don't have to act on it because sex will come again. This is not the last possible time I'll get to have sex. Maybe turning off that fear, that scarcity will help them just be still, touch their partner in non-sexual ways, cuddle, have that physical affection and physical touch, which then takes the pressure off of the partner who feels like obliged or like I gotta always respond to
yeah.
to his touch this way. So when you take the pressure off of both people, that
Mm,
fear around sex and having to be responsive or having to do it just because it may never happen again goes down a bit, and then both of them are able to respond to each other without it being a reaction, but with it being an intention.
okay. That's good. That's good. All right. Last question. Then we actually gonna get into the topic.
Okay.
But I'm telling you, I could, send these to you all day. So a lot of times people are in two different, I don't want to say sexual seasons, it's
Mhm,
like,
mhm.
one person has a high libido, the other person maybe not so much. The other person says, I'm stressed, I got a lot on my plate.
Yes.
The other person is frustrated. And then you see it reverse. And it could go, the man kind of being a little bit more, intense, or it could be the woman, So
Yes.
how do you find that happy median? Like how do you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Without disregarding everything else that they have going on in their life.
Yeah.
Because a
S
lot of times that's what I hear. Like I have all of this, I'm stressed, I'm worried. And again, this I hear it from both sides. I see men who women are like, man, we're not having sex. And guys are like, man, it's just so much on my plate, and vice versa. So
yes.
how do you pull both down to the same space?
So, it's important to normalize sexual desire discrepancy is what you're talking about, is a
Okay.
normal thing that happens in relationships. So sometimes people become afraid that it means their relationship is wrong just because there are differences in desire at different times in the relationship. And there isn't, because
Mm,
you weren't born at the same time, you don't have the same life. And so sometimes a person is going to be higher and the other person will be lower in sexual desire. That's normal.
okay.
Normalizing that takes a lot of the stress away from it. And then you want to find out what's on your partner's plate that you can help with.
Okay.
So for either side of the partnership, just asking, in what ways can I help you? Not transactionally, like so that I can have sex, but because you care about your partner, that's your friend, you want to support them.
Mhm.
So in what ways can I help you? I'll just name one thing I can do for you that will make your day easier, make your day brighter, take some of the weight off your shoulders. And when you do that, you have a better chance of the libido coming back or returning or balancing out because people feel more erotic when there's equity and reciprocity. So
Mm,
there might be an imbalance in what the person has going on at work, or it might be an imbalance in how you guys are navigating chores and stuff at home.
mm.
And maybe you need to sit down and talk about, what are the expectations here? Is there any way I can support you? And once you come to, these are the ways I can be supported, and this is what I need to feel sexual again, or this is what I need because I'm feeling a bit more sexual than I want to. However, you want to, navigate
Yeah.
that. then there's room for you to come to a middle ground.
Okay, great, great. That makes so much sense, especially when you start thinking about it in terms of what I can do to take something off of your plate.
Hmm.
You know, a lot of times we just want the problem to go away.
Right.
just just automatically come home more energized. So it adds a layer of, buy-in. Like I have a
Yeah.
responsibility in this as well too. I know I said that was the last question, but I got one other thing. I
Okay.
was just thinking about this client that I was working with a few days ago. And what about before you get married? Okay. And the sexual chemistry isn't there. Do
Hmm.
you feel like that's a potential deal breaker?
Was it never there or did it go away before the marriage?
They is never there.
Yeah, I think so. And it depends on the reasons why. There's so many reasons why people might commit to each other that are not about attraction and chemistry. So it
Mhm.
depends. Some people are in relationships that are arranged and they work out and they're together for decades, right?
Yeah,
And so I'll never disqualify that.
that's a big bet though.
Right. It's a huge bet, but
Give me a sneak
there
peek or something.
there are whole cultural traditions around that
It
that
is.
work, right?
It
So I'm
is.
just like, it could be a possibility. But if attraction is important to you, you don't have to pretend like it's not. And it's okay
Mhm.
for you to say, I like you as a friend, but I don't feel romantically or sexually attracted to you, or we don't have a good fit sexually. Like it doesn't feel good. But the one thing I would try before you disqualify that partnership is to list out, this is an activity I do a lot with clients, your yes, no, maybe so. So
Okay.
both of you as partners write the yes list. These are all the things I like to do sexually, the things that turn me on most of the time. Your no list is like, tried it, will never try it again. Or I don't even need to try it to know. I don't want no parts. And then and then your maybe so list is like, depend on the context, your birthday. We could
Yeah,
try
yeah,
it,
yeah.
see what's
Birthday.
up.
You can't forget the birthday.
Right. And then compare
Like,
compare
come
your
on, baby,
list.
it's my birthday now.
Right. You compare your list, you look at the list together and see where you've got some overlap or where you have some things on your maybe list that you can, play around with. And maybe you'll find that you just weren't doing the things that they liked sexually. And so they weren't responding, or they weren't doing the things that you like sexually. Like maybe you were afraid to tell them about things that you like that might be considered kinky, or things that you like that they have said were on their no list, but actually they were on their maybe so list, depending on the context.
Yeah. If it's your birthday,
Right. It's a
or
once
maybe
a year thing.
it just depends what how good you've been this year. So
Christmas.
yeah. Yeah. We got family over there, so it gotta get a
Right,
little tricky.
right.
But all right, so let's dive into it. Is your job destroying your sex life? So glad that we connected on this, and it's so important again because just the stress around work. Even though we try to separate our home life and our professional life, the truth is, if you're stressed from work, I'm sure it has bearings on how you show up at home. Talk to me a little bit just about, especially as African Americans, we're obviously face a different type of stress in the workplace.
Yeah.
Tell me how we've kind of been maybe on the short end of the stick when it comes to not only just the stress, but how it's showing up and affecting us sexually in ways that we may
Mhm,
not even imagine.
mhm. So I want to just set the tone that I understand most people need to work to survive. They need
Mhm.
to be employed to pay their bills. And so we have to operate in capitalism, but we
Mhm.
don't have to buy all the way in to
Mhm.
what capitalism is trying to sell us, which is that your worth is tied up in how much you produce. And if you buy into it, right, if you buy into this idea that your worth is tied up in how much you produce, then you overwork because you are trying to compensate for your own sense of self. So you're putting in 12-hour days when your job requires 8 because you think it's tied to your sense of self. And you've
Yeah.
expended all that good creative energy at work. When you get home, you're exhausted and you don't have creative, erotic energy in your relationship. So that's one way it shows up. And then the history for us as Black people is that for so many generations, we were laboring uncompensated or undercompensated. In some ways, we still are,
Yeah.
even though we make,
Priorities.
right, right. And so when you think about that, the amount of work it takes to be able to survive is going to be greater than some of our white counterparts. Like
Mhm.
the sheer number of hours and energy and like navigating systems it takes to survive financially, then shows up like what you have to deal with on those jobs, what you have to deal with as it relates to racist microaggressions and people's expectations of you being way too low or way too high, depending on the setting. That all comes home. So the personal is political for me.
Yeah.
And I think about it in the context of intimate justice. Like, what do your interior, intimate relationships look like as a result of all of these systems of oppression?
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I mean, I know people listening right now, I mean, can identify if it's not the sex part, it's the work part. And most
Yeah.
of us, it's probably a combination of both because they do. I mean, they're connected, you know.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't believe me, just lose your job.
Mm.
You know, and see how stressed out you are and how
Hmm.
it almost it shifts your priorities to some extent. You know,
Hmm.
if you're in a relationship, obviously the other person could be affected just by everything that you're carrying
Yes.
on the inside. You know, we were kind of having not a debate, but we were just talking earlier, you know, about this whole notion around the cultural idea that only men who have a certain amount of money
Hmm.
deserve sexual pleasure, you know. And I'm like, yeah, you know, that's not true, right? But then I'm like, at the same time, let's be real. You know, money gives you maybe a little bit more options when it comes to, you know, women you can date, etc. And it plays an important factor, if for nothing else, the security it may offer.
Mm.
Tell me a little bit, you know, and you brought up a great point. Tell me a little bit how we bought into this narrative, you know,
Yeah.
only men who are at this point deserve this.
Right. So first I want to honor the point that you made, because I'm not contesting it. I'm not saying that
Yeah.
we don't live in
Don't
an
be broke out
inequitable,
here.
right. We don't live in an inequitable society where we
Yeah,
place higher value sometimes on men that have more money. We do live in that. I'm saying it shouldn't be the case.
gotcha.
Right? It shouldn't be the case because, especially if you're thinking about what Black men have had to endure in this
Yeah.
country, many Black men don't have access to financial opportunities that other men have access to. And
Mhm.
so, if we're measuring the worth of manhood on your economic prowess, then they're going to come up short just because they've been discriminated against,
Mhm.
or they've had to take jobs that pay lower because that's the only place they've been hired, even if they're overqualified. And
Mhm.
so if
Mhm.
we're saying you got to make this amount of money before you're worthy, that's a no-go for me. That's similar to saying, like, if you don't look this way, like if you're not
Mhm.
this attractive, you don't deserve love and you don't deserve care.
I'm
We
with you.
know that that happens, but that's
Mhm.
not what it should be.
Oh, and I'm with you 100%.
Yeah.
And I definitely do you think that we've been conditioned or, you know, how do we get to that point? Because, you know, the thing about money is it's so elusive and
Yeah.
it's so relative.
Yeah.
You know, you want six figures, you get six figures, and that's not enough. And then you need to do
Hmm.
this, and then that's not enough. And it's like a finish line that just keeps moving. How do we even get to the point to where we started putting so much worth and value on this fictitious
Yeah.
monetary number?
I think people are in competition with each other, unfortunately, keeping up with the Joneses.
Mhm.
And so you're in a place where first nobody really has much of anything
Mhm.
because of history. And then some people make it and some people don't, based on their privileges, their marginalizations, their work ethic, luck, all of these things, right?
All of the above, yeah.
Right. And then you start creating a human hierarchy based in classism and
Mhm.
capitalism of like, oh, the people who made it are better people, as opposed to they had more advantages, or as opposed to they were luckier or more blessed in this particular instance and not in other areas. And
Mhm.
then people start associating that ability to provide resources with their character as
Mhm.
opposed to just that one piece of a person. So you could be a wealthy person and have terrible character. You can be a poor person and have fantastic character. You can be a poor person and have terrible character.
Yeah.
All of these mixes can happen, but
Mhm.
we associate better character with people who have better economic standing. I was on another show, and she was like, what if you've been, exploited by someone who kind of took advantage of you? And so they were on your couch playing PlayStation while you were out there working and everything. Wouldn't it make sense that you wouldn't want to date somebody like that again? And I was like, well, I guess that would be stereotypical to me. Like, if you think that one experience explains
Yeah,
the experience of everybody else that might be poor or down on their luck financially, then you'd be participating in stereotyping just like other people are.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And you almost lost me a PlayStation.
Mhm. I don't know what the systems are
Yeah.
anymore. Is that not
Well,
the
I
right
mean,
one?
just the fact that, you take these extreme examples and try
Right.
to generalize.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So I'm with you. What about some of the underlying aspects? And again, and just naming that, there's so many things. Like at least I consider myself exceptionally blessed.
Hmm.
Yeah, I work hard, do all that good stuff. But there's been some outliers in my life along the way that have played a huge role in just helping me be on the track that I am. It's like all the work in the world doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna get to point B. You know,
Hmm.
you said it earlier, it's a combination, some little luck, some little work, some relationships that I feel like forever indebted to. But what about what money represents or could represent? Whether that's someone's work ethic, someone
Hmm.
being able to have a plan, isn't that attractive?
And I,
Or could it be?
I think that you can assess that in different ways.
Hmm.
So the example that we talked about before is that, I'm the first generation in my family to be in this financial position, that like in a healthier financial position, even though my grandparents and parents and my great grandparents worked just as hard, if not harder than I do.
Harder, for sure.
You know what I mean? And so to qualify their worth or their work ethic, to compare their work ethic to mine and be like, oh, you're coming up short because you couldn't buy this type of house or you couldn't live here, you couldn't do these things. It's like,
Mm,
that's fallible. Like, it's
yeah.
not it doesn't make sense. But if you
Mhm,
don't think about it within that context, then it's easy to make that assumption. And so you can ask people about their work ethic, and you can ask people about their character. You can see how they treat folks. You can see, what is excellence a standard for themselves? Like, when they do something, do they like to do it well? And they might have a job that simply doesn't pay well. So if a
mm,
person is a high school teacher and that's what they love to do and that's what they're excellent at, they win all the awards in the world, they're probably
mhm.
not going to cross a six-figure salary
Yeah.
unless they move into administration. Does that mean that person who's making $55,000 a year doesn't deserve a healthy sex life,
Yeah.
doesn't deserve a good partner? No, I don't think so.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Now, do you think it's the same for men and women? I
Mhm.
saw Chris Rock when he came here to Houston, and he was talking about. He says, "Man, if he's talking about how fine Beyonce was, and he's like, if she worked at McDonald's, Jay Z would still be interested because she that fine. But if
Mhm.
Jay Z worked at McDonald's, you know, Beyonce wouldn't probably be choosing on him like that. When you think about just how we've attached worth to money, how do
Mhm.
you think it varies between men and women, and why do you think that's the case? If there is a difference.
Yeah, I think that we give men and women different currency.
Mm,
And for me, that's based in, sexism, but for other
mhm,
people, they might explain it from an evolutionary bias. Like whatever way you explain it, we're in a moment in history where we give men and women different currency. So a well-educated, financially established woman doesn't have currency in her education and financial status as much as she does in what she might look like to a number of men, right?
yeah.
And that's not, to me, that's not a fair measure of her character either. So
Mhm,
if the person just happens to look the way you want and they have the type of body that you want, that can say nothing about their character,
yeah.
like nothing
That's
about how they're going to
absolutely
end up
right. Yeah.
in the relationship. But if you buy into, like, if you're a man who buys into beauty as the currency that women have, then that might be the partner you choose.
Mhm,
Same for women. If they see that a man is driving a certain type of car and, that has a certain lives in a certain neighborhood, has a certain type of profession, they might associate that with a really good partner, not knowing anything about his character. And if
Mhm.
they think the currency of a man is his financial means, then they might be like, I'm going for him, regardless of what he's going to do on the back end.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think that when we buy into these really narrow windows of who a good person is, who a good partner is, then it's easy to get caught up in that. And a lot of people do.
Yeah, they do. They really do. Speaking of how people kind of get caught up into that and really even focusing on the sexism part of it, how do we unknowingly or knowingly contribute to the sexism part? Like what are some ways that someone may not even realize how they're really perpetuating this sexism, this
Mhm.
narrative that this is what your value is, this is what you're worth it, and not
Yeah.
even realize it. What are some ways that people should be mindful of how they approach this?
I think you always want to question yourself when you notice a double standard that you're holding. So if you think about men and women as these like diametrically opposed Mars and Venus type of beings, you might be buying into sexism, and that's whatever gender you are. If
Mm-hmm.
you think that, men should have access to things that women shouldn't have access to, or men are supposed to be a certain way, a real man does this, a real man does that, a real woman does this, a real woman does that. If you start policing other people and how they do gender, you
Oh yeah.
probably buying into sexism.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I love how you put that just with the double standard. Because I think we all can, if we're being honest,
Mhm.
we all can like reflect on a time and instance and
Yeah.
experience where we say, "Oh no, it's okay for you, but not
Yes.
for you."
Yes.
Even if we don't know where we even came up with it.
And it'll have us in a chokehold for a minute. I don't know if this is your experience, Dr. Nick, but when I think about the conversations my husband and I have about what it meant for him, what it means for him to be a Black man in this world, and the standards he gets held to, and how other Black men or other men, not just Black men, like police his masculinity. So if like, I love you, bro, like you my like why would you say you love me? And it's like, why wouldn't he say he
Yeah.
loves his friend? Like little stuff
No,
like that as an
or you
example.
say it, but don't like say it with like, I
Right,
love you. Like, just
right.
I love you,
Yeah,
something
yeah, I
vague.
love. Like,
Yeah.
you can't even put a V on it. It just
Yeah,
gotta
or
be
you say it and then
LUH.
follow up with a joke, like I love
Right.
you. Oh, I'm from Memphis, so we always, checking each other. It's
Mhm.
like, why can't you just say a compliment?
Yes. So the fact that sometimes men can't even compliment their peers and be without it being a joke or without it, being um eroticized in some way, that's a part of sexism to me. Like that's a double standard because I can be like, girl, I love you, my
Mhm.
home girl,
Yeah.
hugging, dapping, like, and nobody would blink.
Yeah, that's so true. Look, even this is why it's so good, and I appreciate you so much because even as you said that, like in the back of my mind, I was like, yeah, but there's some stuff my wife can do with her friends that I can't do.
And
Like,
that's the thing, right? Like,
mhm,
because you know that if you did that with your friends, even if it's something you wanted to do that you felt would be healthy for them and for you, would you be picked on?
mhm.
Would you be
Yes,
ostracized?
yes,
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
yes.
And we do that to each other. I think that's unfortunate, but that's where we are sometimes.
Yeah, and I think even just recognizing that that's what it is. That's why you giving language to it because again, sometimes we just doing it and it's so cavalier.
Yeah.
I'm on a group text with friends. We just but not
Mhm.
even realizing that a lot of what we do may actually be rooted and even beyond sexism, right? That a lot of this is
Yes.
rooted in
Mhm.
especially race and just how we've been conditioned as
Yeah.
Black sometimes. So let me switch gears and kind of focus on this last topic: a healthy sex life.
Yeah.
Okay, a healthy sex life, and there's so much out there online. Do this, do that. Someone who is in the research, like you said, for over a decade. What are some of the main what needs to exist to have a healthy sex life?
Mhm.
Well, actually, start back. What is a healthy sex life?
I think each person gets to define healthy sex life for themselves. And then when they choose a partnership, they get to co create what it is together.
Hmm.
So if you haven't taken the moment before you're partnered which most people haven't, and I'm not judging or blaming, to define what healthy sex life is for yourself, to really talk yourself through it or write yourself through it, then maybe you need to take a moment to do that and to be like, okay, healthy sex for me is, like we talked about, it's passionate, or it's intimate, it's
Mhm.
loving, it's pleasurable, it's
Mhm.
orgasmic. All of these terms that when we surveyed our group of people, they came up with 20 terms,
Mhm.
but everybody doesn't think it's the same few things.
Yeah,
And it's okay. I will say the baseline is that it's consensual,
absolutely.
right? And consensual is something that a lot of people don't even understand what it means, but that each person had agency in choosing to be in that sexual encounter. But it can also be solo sexual and be a healthy sex life. So
Mhm.
maybe you're not partnered, or maybe you are partnered, but you enjoy sex with yourself. That can be a part of a healthy sex life. And some people don't understand that in the context of a relationship. So you really have to sit with yourself. For me, I like it to be intimate, transcendent,
Mhm.
pleasurable, of course, consensual,
Yeah.
joyful, loving. These are components that work for me. For you, there might be other components. So some of our participants, like, it got to be nasty, it got to be fun,
Oh,
it
I
got
could
to
only
be,
imagine the
like,
stuff you
and I'm
get.
like,
You're like,
okay,
"What?
yes, like
No
that.
judge?" You like,
Not at all.
"That's a new one."
I'm like, okay, yes, but it made the top 20. So a lot of people were thinking it, and it's like,
Maybe
all right,
other
that's
people.
good to know.
Don't forget this. Yeah.
Right.
That's good. That really is. How do people, and this is just kind of some random questions as it relates to sex, but there's so many issues connected to it that I could literally be here for days.
Yeah.
Um, what about when it comes to trust? All
Mhm.
right. And say there's infidelity. How do
Mhm.
you reestablish the trust from a sexual perspective after someone has stepped outside of the confines of the relationship?
I think there might be some stages to it, and they don't have to go in a linear order,
Okay.
but the person has to be willing to admit the harm that was done, and they have to have enough self-awareness or move through the journey of self-awareness with, like, a therapist, or like a somebody that can guide them as a
Mhm.
couple and individually with, where did it come from, what need were you trying to meet, is that a need that you can meet within the relationship, or are there other relationship dynamics that you need to think through that might not work with this partner that you're
Mhm.
with? So if someone is feeling unsatisfied in their relationship and they act out sexually with another person, they could have chosen any number of ways to talk about their sexual satisfaction or their lack of satisfaction before they got there. What
Mhm.
is it about you that made you decide to act as opposed to communicate? And we can, like, that could be one of the questions that's
Yeah.
asked. But I think that reestablishing trust is possible. It takes time. We've seen generations of people do it,
Mhm.
and so it's never something that's off the table, but there has to be honesty, and the vulnerability that comes with honesty for the person who stepped out and the person who was stepped out on has to come
Mhm.
in. Like, are you still wanting to be in this relationship as the person who was stepped out on?
Yeah.
You know, did you check out from that person? Do you have contempt for that person? Have you had it for a long time before you even found out about the affair? And for the person who stepped out, do you feel like this is a pattern for you? Is
Mhm.
this something impulsive or compulsive that you've had a hard time controlling in general, not just in this? And if so, what prevented you from being able to be honest about that with your partner up front? Do you really need an ethically non-monogamous relationship to thrive? Do you
Mhm.
need the option of other partners? And can you be honest about that and let the person who you're with consent or say no thank you?
I know. Thank you.
Like,
Yeah.
those are some of the pieces that you start to repair.
Last question, and that is having the difficult conversation that
Mhm.
someone isn't, you know, giving you what you need. Like
Yeah.
that's not really, it's just not really doing it for you. I hear people come to me and they're like, man, it's I kind of envision this,
Mhm.
I'm getting this, but they don't want to hurt the other person's feelings.
Yes. I hear that all the time.
And so they're struggling with how do I navigate that without creating more damage, or making them insecure. Then they cut the sex off altogether. And it's like, shoot,
Mhm.
that didn't work. you know, like how would someone navigate that conversation?
Yeah. I think it is more vulnerable to ask for what you want than it is to leave.
Mm,
Because, like we had the earlier conversation about facing rejection, this one applies to everyone in the relationship to be able to say, this is what I need. Are you in a position? Do you have the capacity? Do you have the desire to give it to me?
mm,
And if you don't, what does that mean for us? That's the way you ask those questions. So there's no blame in it. It's
yeah.
you really personalizing, this is what I need. And if the person says, I do have the capacity, but I don't have the desire,
Hmm.
y'all got to talk through
Yeah.
that. And if they say, I have the desire, I really do, but I don't have the capacity, then it goes back to the other part of our conversation. Are there things I can take off your plate or support you with so that your capacity can come back up?
Yeah.
Um, and the other piece is that, there are two ways that people you can choose to stay in the game and communicate and continue to communicate. It's not a one-time conversation and then you solved it and then you're
One done,
Gucci.
we good. Yeah.
No, we're Gucci now. We have one
We
conversation.
straight. We talked about that last week.
Right.
Yeah.
Last year.
Come on now.
It's an ongoing
For your birthday.
conversation because you're gonna be a different person than you were a year ago if you're
Mhm.
evolving. And so you want to set time points in your relationship where you come to the table whether things are good or not so good. Maybe quarterly, you're like, all right, we're gonna touch base with Dr. Nick quarterly.
Mhm.
Or quarterly, you're like, we're gonna touch base with each other quarterly
Mhm.
and be like, how are you feeling in relationship with me? I need this. I feel like you're meeting these needs, but these are some needs that are not being met. Do you have capacity for it? And they get to say, yes, I do, or no, I don't. And that doesn't mean they're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're a bad person for having needs. And they can say the same. And then you sit with, wow, they asked me for something that I don't have the capacity to give.
Mm.
And you have to take your ego out of that
Yeah.
and be like, I don't have the capacity to give this, but I want you to have what you want. So maybe I can learn. Or I don't have the capacity to give this. Are there ways that are still good within our relationship that you can meet that? So maybe it's something you need in a friendship. It might not even be a sexual thing. It's like maybe there's somebody you really need to talk to about the harmful things that are going on in your life. And I'm like, I don't got the capacity to listen to your complaints.
Yeah.
And it's
That's
like,
real.
okay, well then maybe a therapist is a good person for me to go to, or maybe I have a friend that can really listen to me right now.
That's good. That's good. Dr. Candace, how can people get in touch with you? I snuck in some freebies. You're like, all right, Nick.
I don't mind at all. I love questions.
you know.
You
But how
can
can people
reach
get in contact with you? Yeah. So
you can reach me at my website, drcandicenicole.com. I'm on IG the most at Dr. Nicole, and I'm on Facebook as Twitter sometimes. And I have two podcasts on YouTube. And so it's How to Love a Human, where I ask people with marginalized identities what the world would be like if it loved them. And then I have one called Fuck the System, FTS, and we
yeah,
talk about sexual liberation. So you can
love
check
it.
either of those out.
Oh, that's awesome. And they're on YouTube. What about, are they on any of the streaming platforms?
So Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud,
Okay.
you'll find How to Love a Human, but FTS is only on YouTube.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. Well, listen, definitely go check out Dr. Candace on all streaming platforms on YouTube, and definitely follow her on Instagram. Um, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm extremely grateful to just kind of share this space with you. And for
Thank
anyone
you.
listening, definitely subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on IG, YouTube, and yeah, tune in next time to another episode of Untherapeutic.
Thank you.